Before the desert became endless, before sand erased horizons and silence swallowed distance, the Sahara was alive. It breathed with rivers, lakes, and the movement of people. Our story begins in that forgotten world, revealed not through ruins, but through a vast emptiness that feels too deliberate to be natural. As we drift over dunes shaped like frozen waves, we have to ask a dangerous question. What if the Sahara is you and empty, because nothing was ever there, but because something immense was lost? What if, beneath the sand, lie the remains of an empire so old and so thoroughly erased that history itself learned to look away? Ancient legends from across North Africa speak of powerful civilizations punished by drought, of green lands turned to dust by the anger of the heavens. Berber oral traditions, Egyptian texts, and even classical accounts all reference vanished kingdoms swallowed by the desert. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as myth, but their consistency hints at a shared, traumatic memory, not mere coincidence. When we look at ancient rock art and weathered inscriptions, it seems that myth becomes history's last refuge when catastrophe moves faster than when cities vanish without a single battle. Stories become the only vessel left to carry the truth forward into the future. Ancient maps only deepen this unease. They depict rivers, lakes, and fertile regions across the Sahara, where nothing exists today. Medieval Islamic cartographers and classical geographers described inland cities, bustling trade hubs, and green corridors stretching deep into the continent. These weren't imaginative sketches. They were compilations drawn from even earlier sources and traveler accounts. When we overlay these maps onto modern satellite imagery, we find something incredible. They align perfectly with buried riverbeds and ancient lake basins. If these maps remember a greener Sahara, then they also preserve the geography of a time when the desert had not yet erased the possibility of a powerful empire. And climate science confirms this transformation was real and devastating. Thousands of years ago, monsoon systems collapsed. Rainfall retreated southward, and fertile lands dried up with terrifying speed. Radar imaging reveals fossil shorelines and massive ancient lake basins hidden beneath the sand, emphasizing the sheer scale of this change. Climate doesn't destroy cities with fire and sword. It quietly removes the very conditions that sustain them. As the water disappeared, populations were forced to migrate, abandoning infrastructure that simply could not survive the growing aridity. An empire dependent on water wouldn't fall in a dramatic war. It would dissolve quietly, its people scattering while sand reclaimed their foundations. So why is this idea so resisted? Because a lost empire beneath the Sahara completely disrupts our assumptions about Africa's ancient past. Colonial narratives framed the desert as an eternal, timeless emptiness. An academic caution reinforced that image through simple neglect. It's easier to ignore than to investigate. But if the Sahara truly hides a forgotten empire, then the very foundations of our history begin to shift uncomfortably. The desert stretches on, silent and immense, leaving us to wonder if we've mistaken emptiness for absence, and if forgetting can be just as powerful as destruction itself. Beneath the sands of the Sahara, a new history is being written. It's a story not of random survival, but of incredible planning, using satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar. Archaeologists are uncovering vast, ancient river systems. What's amazing is that many of these channels are unnaturally straight, suggesting they were engineered by human hands, guiding water across the landscape. We can now digitally reconstruct massive lakes, surrounded by geometric patterns that hint at organized settlements. These aren't cities in the way we think of them, but the repetition of these patterns across thousands of kilometers points to a coordinated society. It suggests shared knowledge and leadership, the quiet signatures of an empire built on water, movement, and seasonal abundance, rather than permanent stone cities. Rock art scattered across the desert adds another layer to this story. In regions now completely hostile to life, we find vivid depictions of cattle herding, boats, and communal rituals. Tessemaches found hundreds of miles apart share a common style and symbolism, proving a deep cultural connection, not isolation. This wasn't just a society focused on survival. They were stable enough to invest in art, in meaning, and in identity. When the climate collapsed and the green Sahara turned to sand, these markers were left behind, stranded in a world that no longer made sense. Future generations would doubt the people who made them, rather than question the land that had so drastically changed. Trade networks reveal even more. Artifacts from distant coasts and deep inland regions have been found in the heart of the Sahara. Shells, metals, and symbolic objects trace routes of exchange that predate known trans-Saharan commerce by millennia. When we overlay these finds onto the reconstructed waterways, they reveal ancient corridors of trade that vanished as the desert expanded. This lost civilization likely acted as a crucial connector, linking different parts of Africa. When the water failed, the trade routes collapsed, and the wealth and influence dispersed, leaving behind scattered evidence that we've long dismissed as mere coincidence. Ancient texts from Greek, Roman, and Islamic writers echo this disappearance. They speak of prosperous inland kingdoms that faded without any record of being conquered. These accounts were often dismissed as myth or exaggeration because the geography they described no longer existed. It seems memory outlived the landscape itself. So, this lost empire isn't being revealed by a single grand discovery, but through the convergence of all this fragmented evidence. Perhaps some civilizations don't vanish because they're weak, but because they are perfectly adapted to a balance that is lost. When their world changed, they didn't build walls. They dispersed. What remains is a powerful influence without a clear origin, and a desert that only appears empty because its history learned to move when survival demanded it. As our story reaches its final chapter, modern technology becomes the last voice capable of speaking for a civilization buried too deep for any shovel. Satellites map subtle changes in gravity and soil chemistry, revealing human-altered landscapes invisible from the ground. Artificial intelligence compares ancient maps, climate models, and archaeological data, exposing repeating patterns hidden beneath the sand. We see glowing digital layers where rivers, settlements, and ancient routes faintly reappear. The proof, it seems, no longer arrives as ruins, but as a convergence of data. When all these independent signals align, coincidence fades. The Sahara starts to read less like an empty wasteland and more like an erased archive. But how this evidence is received is shaped by politics. The idea of a powerful, prehistoric Saharan empire challenges long-standing hierarchies of history. Colonial frameworks once cast Africa's interior as timeless and undeveloped, and those assumptions quietly linger. We can see it in museums and textbooks where the continent's complexity is minimized. Suppression rarely needs outright denial. It only requires delay and omission. Research in remote desert regions is expensive and politically sensitive, while safer, more familiar narratives attract funding and attention. By favoring what's visible, institutions protect comfort, creating a silence that preserves outdated ideas while disruptive possibilities remain on the fringe. Yet, where written history hesitates, oral traditions continue. They preserve memory through language, ritual, and migration stories passed down through generations. Elders speak of ancestors fleeing drying lands, of water spirits abandoned, of homelands lost beneath the heat and sand. When we listen closely and match these stories to satellite-revealed Paleolithic and migration genetics, they gain unexpected clarity. They don't name an empire, but they remember a center, a place left behind, whose influence radiated outward as its people adapted to survive. Climate science reframes the entire narrative. The Sahara's transformation from lush landscape to desert was abrupt, dismantling even the most resilient systems. Within just a few centuries, lakes vanished and vital corridors closed. Collapse doesn't have to be violent to be complete. As rainfall failed, networks unraveled, identities fragmented, and a shared purpose dissolved. The empire didn't fall. It dispersed, exporting its people and knowledge into surrounding regions, where they became the seeds of later cultures. Its absence isn't a failure, but a consequence, a reminder that the environment can erase power faster than memory can adjust. As the final images fade, the Sahara stretches outward, vast and indifferent. The dunes roll endlessly beneath the sky, unchanged since water last flowed here, and we are left with a chilling thought. The greatest danger is believing that collapse requires ruins. Somewhere beneath the sand lies proof that a civilization can vanish almost without a trace, leaving only silence, fragments, and doubt. If an empire once thrived here and disappeared through climate change alone, then our present is not immune. The desert waits patiently, not to hide the past, but to remind us that history survives only when we are willing to recognize absence as evidence and understand that forgetting is the most complete form of loss. Thanks for watching.